Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski on Sheikh Chesed in New York City. We are recording this on day 382 of the war, 382 of the hostages. This is also the week that will be commemorating the Yortzeit on the Hebrew calendar, since we are recording this just a couple of days before what is in the diaspora Shmini Atzeret, which would be Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah in Israel, the actual day. Of course, this year had the extra month of Dar Sheni, so this is why the dates are somewhat off from the calendar. Nevertheless, we are approaching this milestone, and of course, we've been um, mentioning this right at the beginning of all of our discussions, how we are praying for the return of the hostages, their freedom under these unbearable circumstances, praying that they are still alive and surviving the horrors that they are experiencing. Well, every one of us is marking the real beginning of a new year through Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah. Of course, we've been commemorating the those people who were killed throughout the Yamim Norim. We had a Yizkor service. I know, Jeremy, you had your martyrology on Yom Kippur, dedicated to victims of October the 7th, and of course we'll touch on, we'll mention and of course add special Yizkor prayers over Shmini Atzeret. And so we have an unusual configuration of the calendar this year with Shmini Atzeret on Thursday, Simchat Torah on Friday, and then Shabbat Bereishit on Shabbat, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, another 3-day Yontiv, which I think takes a lot of energy out of people on the day after. But we're looking forward to starting a new cycle of the Torah reading. Notwithstanding that we're coming at it, as just another spiral in our lives, basically, ending the Torah and starting it over again, and looking forward to new discoveries that we can make in the study of the Torah, while revisiting old stories, but and questions that we may have asked in the past that deserve being asked again from different perspective. What is this? What is Bereshit trying to tell us? What are these opening chapters trying to tell us? Even if you start with chapter 1 of Bereshit, which is Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim et haaretz, which we usually translate as when God began, or in the beginning God created the heaven and earth, um, and we get the series of days of creation, um, and the world as it unfolds in the literature. It's over. The creation is over in 7 days with Shabbat. Often like to think about the fact that if you just dip into any cosmo cosmological theory or scientific theory about the origin of the universe, it's more than 7 days. It's a few billion years, but in Judaism, in the Torah, we do that in the space of an aliyah. We go through.
But it's a long aliyah. It's
It's a
really
long
quite long.
aliyah, and so obviously it's not trying to tell us science. So what is it trying to teach us, or what is it trying to tell us? When you're asked this
Well,
question,
I would like to say that, I mean, I'm reading this because I am not just a reader of the Torah, but like a religious and spiritual and modern thinker. I want to say that it's not true that the Torah is telling us that creation is completed. It does say, "Vayachulu hashamayim v'aretz v'chol tziba'am," the heavens and earth and all their hosts came to a completion. It does say that. And yet there are all kinds of ways in which the Jewish rendering of creation stresses that God creates raw material and expects human beings to do something with it. I'll just give you a couple of examples. There's an amazing midrash, which I say this one a lot at weddings. in the creation story, there's a lot of tov, 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 tovs. Everything is good. This is good. That's good. This is very, very good. And then it says lo tov heyot adam levado. It's not good for people to be alone. There's no more life that happens unless people and most species have some sexual reproduction, male and female. You need togetherness to perpetuate more life. And the Midrash says, that the utterances of which the God created the world through 10 utterances. It included a bunch of tov tov tovs, everything that was good, and some space for lo tov, some space for it's not good yet, and human beings have their part to play, to develop, to grow, to come together, to build more. And I really find that tremendously, tremendously meaningful. I'll just give you one more example. The wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Psalm 104, which we say on Rosh Chodesh, which is a creation psalm. It's just the most beautiful lyric in the Tanakh, I think, or one of them. And everybody knows the phrase, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, God brings forth food from the earth. That psalm of creation says that God gave Esev la'avodat adam lahotzi lechem min haaretz, that God created the grass for human labor, so that human labor could bring forth food from the earth. That this to me speaks, this speaks to me religiously on a deep level. God didn't create food. God created wheat and human ingenuity and culture and fire and flour and grinding mills and grocery stores found out a way to feed everybody. And so I feel like what I take away from Genesis is not the perfect divine creation, but the divine creation that gives us so much more work to do.
So what I would add is that we have, as many of us come to realize, two creation stories. The first creation story, which is chapter 1 and the first 3 verses of chapter 2, which includes Shabbat, sends the message that creation is purposeful and intentional. Everything happens in a very orderly way, and things follow one from the other. And I think, listening to you talk, Jeremy, with the Vayachulu Hashemayim, with the heavens and earth and the hosts come to completion, but human beings are not complete. And the rest of the Torah is going to pick up with that idea, that life on earth is a kind of completing, if you will, where our task is to complete what God began. And I think that can be a powerful message, notwithstanding that the early human efforts end in one disaster after another. Right? Very quickly, we have the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve will be kicked out for their sin. We have the story of Cain and Abel, where the human population is going to be reduced by 25% through the murder of Abel by Cain. And then, it sets us up for the flood, where God's going to go to plan B, a do-over, I guess the divine mulligan, where you scrap the first earth that you make and try one more time to see if it'll come out any better.
I was thinking, of the concept of shutafut, and we've talked about that, and that the creation story and the way that you're interpreting it uh, gives us a place for shutafut. Shutafut means partnership. Partnership. I use that concept for the sukkah. And there's a rabbinic statement that if you fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah, you are considered to be a shutaf. Kadosh Baruch Hu Naseh shutaf lakadosh Baruch Hu b'maaseh Bereishit. You become a partner with God in creation, which I think is such a rich idea. And Barry, this is where what you touched on, which is the world is unfinished, and therefore, or the world is as God creates it, is filled with the raw material for all of us. And that, Jeremy, that was your point in the production of bread. We have all the materials available to us. And so therefore, by our industry, ingenuity, creativity, and by aspiration, altruism, and the idea that we want to be like God in our exercise of power, will, and ingenuity and creativity, we can be co-creators or partners with God in the unfolding of creation. When the tradition talks about it, it does focus on some very specific ideas, like the mitzvah of Sukkah, or reciting the Kiddush on Friday night, Vayechulu, Vayechalu. It is that we are saying in the Kiddush it was completed, but the rabbis say maybe when you read it Vayechalu, that they human beings and God both participated in the completion of the universe or the completion of the world. I think there's something there. There's something to be put forward in terms of an idea that we're partners. Being a partner means that there's a lot of dignity in being a human being and a lot of challenge, and that God affirms in us our potential to be.
I cannot, I think that is, I don't think you could possibly overstate how central what the point that you're just making is in Judaism, in
Yeah.
rabbinic Judaism, certainly as it develops from the Bible, the idea that the greatest thing a human being can be is the co-creator. You have in brit, in covenant, expectations upon you. And it's not because God is, you know, like incapable of creating more. God's creation was pretty awesome. But in this religion, the thought is that some responsibilities are divine, some are human, and you are adequate. You are morally adequate to live in a world of responsibility and ethical behavior. You are intellectually adequate to understand the world and what is demanded of you, to understand the Torah, to understand divine teaching. And this is a parsha, the human being goes wrong a lot, right? The Adam and Eve disobey, and Cain kills Abel. And at the end of the parsha, the God who said, "Let's create human beings in our image," and it's so good, 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 top, 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 says, "I'm sorry I ever made these stupid people," and has to start all over again. But I don't want to lose my heart to that negativity. I think that the main thrust is that human beings are the partners, the
Well, I
shutafim.
would I would add in the most central way, which is Pruervu, that the human beings have the capacity,
Exactly.
literally, to create other human beings, and that the creation of a human being in partnership with God. I mean, that's one of the great classic rabbinic texts. It doesn't say in that text, by the way, that they are shutafim b'maaseh breshit, but that I'm referring to the text in which it's the rabbis are saying there are three partners in the creation of a human being, a mother, a father, and God. That by this unique partnership, another human being is produced, and so by creating us and becoming co-creators or partners in creation, we are able to produce the ultimate in human creativity, which is another human being.
So what I would add here is that we tend to read the Torah vertically, meaning the Bible's our beginning text as Jews, and then we move to rabbinic literature, and we often interpret the Bible in light of the rabbis. But it's also important to take a horizontal approach and to consider the other stories that the cultures that were around at the same time as our biblical ancestors, what kind of stories were they telling? And in many of those stories, human beings are slaves for the gods. The gods are kind of lazy, and the human beings are created to serve the gods. The biblical idea is that service of God is supposed to be ennobling. It's not something that we do for a God who's too lazy to fend for him or herself. But as you both said, we're partnering with God in creating something. And I just want to mention again, because I thought it was a bon mot, that it says in chapter 1 that human beings are created in the image of God. But one of the things that we can take away is that the human task is to create ourselves in the image of God.
Yeah.
That's our sacred task, that it is good to be alive. The world that we live in is and can be a good world, but more importantly, it could be a better world, and we could be better people. And we're aspirational and we're striving because we want to join with God.
So,
Just to put a little cherry on top of that beautiful point, one of the weird phrases in our parasha for this week is when God says, "Na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu," let us make humanity in our image, in the first person plural. Who's going on there? Because this monotheistic religion doesn't like the thought that there are any other heavenly powers up there. So what do you got? You got a small number of midrashic options. You can say Naaseh Adam b'tzalmenu. God is consulting with this angelic retinue, and there's some evidence for that. God is consulting with all of the previous creation because humanity is made here on the eve of the sixth day, on the eve of Shabbat. He consulted with all the sea and the stars and the animals and the trees, and there's one midrash that says God speaks to the Torah and says Naaseh Adam b'tzalmenu. Let's make humanity in our image, me, the divine, and you, the teaching. And I just think that speaks really to where you were pointing, Barry, that the process of developing, it's not that human beings are good or bad, it's that human beings always have to become in the image of the divine, in the image of the Torah. We have to work ourselves into being something better than we might be just quote unquote naturally.
so the Parsha has this kind of exuberant opening with God as creating everything and the human being in chapter 1 being the pinnacle of creation. Really, the pinnacle is Shabbat. Um, I think that reading there's a reason why this Judaism makes us remind ourselves on a weekly basis of Shabbat through the recitation of the biblical passage in the Kiddush and other places. Um, and then, of course, we get, as Barry mentioned, the second story of creation, Adam and Eve, and then their experience in the Garden of Eden, and then their experience out of the Garden of Eden. And then we get to really one of the darkest stories in the opening chapters, which is the story of Cain and Abel. It's not exuberant. It's quite a sad story, I suppose. You have it beginning with a kind of exuberance where Cain, the Torah reports to us that Adam knew his wife. She is pregnant. She has a child. She says, she names him Cain, Vatomer Kaniti Ish et Adonai. I have gained a male child with the help of the Lord. I'm using the Jewish Publication Society translation. She is very exuberant, exultant in the fact that she has created something with God, like God. And then there's another child, Havel, which is breath. Uh, and then we learned that Havel becomes a shepherd and Cain is a Oved Adama, tiller of the soil. And then shortly thereafter, the Bible compresses a lot of time. Cain, out of nowhere, brings his offering, Mipriha Adama Mincha Adonai, a gift to God from the fruit of the soil. Hevel brings the choicest of the firstlings of his flock. And then the critical verse, it says, Vayisha Adonai el Hevel minchato. God paid heed to Abel, or God takes note of Abel and his offering. Vel Cain al minchato lo sha. But God doesn't pay attention to Cain and his offering. And this arouses whatever it is that arouses. I don't want to say jealousy on Cain's part, other than to say that here's a guy who wanted God to have attention to him, and God doesn't pay attention. God's attention was taken away in the way almost like a parent, when a parent has two children and one child does one thing and it's all very nice, and the other child does something totally unpredictable, unpredicted, and has really astounded the parent. And that's how I read Cain and Abel. Cain does a gracious act, a generous act, but Abel takes an animal and slaughters an animal. It doesn't say that it's slaughtered, but the implication here is that when he brings the offering of a sheep, the firstling of his flock, doesn't tell us that he slaughters it. It doesn't tell us about its blood. It doesn't tell us about any
Well, it tells about the fat. So I
fat.
think
Okay.
it clearly means that. I think it does mean that he killed the animal.
All right. So it leaves out some of the violence, and it makes us understand that in order to render this animal, he had to kill it.
You
And I
know,
think
one of the
that's
things
what
that
takes God's attention.
yeah,
Go
one of the things that strikes me as the Bible in some of its stories, and this perhaps is one of them. There's a lot packed into something very small. Like Cain, the first child, the mother Chava says something extraordinary, and the Bible often will want to explain the names of the characters, and that tells you something about how excited people are for that person's life. It explains the name Yitzchak, or it explains the various names of Jacob's children. Eve here explains the name Cain, Kaniti Ish et Adonai. I created a human being along with God in the reasons that we were talking about before. Hevel doesn't get that. Hevel doesn't get an explanation for his name, which means breath, which means maybe something that doesn't last very long, evanescent. And I'm reading this as like the perspective of the older child who grew to expect massive amount of parental love. And then the second child comes on, and I don't even know anything about the child. His name is Breath. His parents don't give a little midrash about what his name means. And then lo and behold, this baby gets all the attention, and God pays attention to this baby's offering, and I get nothing. And I think that in these tiny little spare verses, which doesn't explain Cain's jealousy, it indicates Cain's jealousy because Hevel, who doesn't seem like more than a gasp, who doesn't get a midrash about what the meaning of his name is, who doesn't seem to deserve all this attention. He's the one that God goes bananas for, and El Kain Vel Minchato Lo Sha'a, and God didn't pay attention to. Although if we read with a little bit of um, uh, a little bit of uh, like over literal, you know, but El Kain Vel Minchato Lo Sha'a means God didn't pay attention. But I was saying, Ein Lo Sha'a, he ain't got no time. God ain't got no time
It's very nice. That's a nice dress.
to pay attention to Cain's vegetable products when this amazing baby brings the animal products.
I want to, having spent the first 15 minutes here talking about being in God's image, and now, being on the verge of this act of violence, we didn't, recite the verses where Cain, kills Abel, but the shedding of blood and the destruction of the divine image uh, horrifies us. And this is here in the Bible. And why? Why is it here, Barry?
So what I would suggest, first of all, it's here to convey an important lesson that God is not always present the way that we want him to be present. And that's just a fact of life that often makes us uncomfortable. And it's not a fact of life that comes with an easy resolution. I think we can agree that Cain's action was not his best choice. And it's a hard lesson to learn. And it's striking that when God is having his first conversation with Cain, he tells him that he could be the master of sin. Sin will attract you, and you could be the master of it, in language that echoes what God says to Chava, to Eve, after she has eaten from the apple, that the husband will now become the master over the wife. And Cain is sort of uh, I hesitate to call him a victim, but in some ways he is a victim. He's the farmer, and he is laboring very mightily under the curse of Adam. The land is cursed because of Adam's participation in the sin in the garden, and Cain does not have as much to work with in terms of natural resources as his brother Abel, the shepherd,
Hmm.
who is not disabled in any way by the failings of the land. And I think that in some ways we're supposed to see ourselves as Cain, that he represents a side of us that we have to reckon with, and it's not an easy task.
In a way, I want to agree with you, but I also want to say we're every character in the story, and I guess I don't is that Jung or Freud? I mean,
Yeah,
we're
Freud. So you're every character in your dream.
we're every character in this dream, and to a certain extent, I agree with you. I mean, we have this need for attention, and we are Hevel. We're victimized by our own ingenuity, our own creativity. Um, and you know what? I don't want to go too too depressing here because this is a story of humanity and murder and fratricide, and all murders are are really fratricides. Um, but I want to, you know what, with your permission, just go to the coda of the story, which to me, is the only hopeful, note. Um, Vayeda Adam od adishto, that after all of this and the punishment that's meted out to Cain, and Cain, we get a few pieces of information about him. It says, verse 25, chapter 4, that Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son, Vateled Ben, and she called him Shet, Vatikra et shmo Shet, ki shat li Elohim zera acher, because God has provided me with another offspring in place of Abel, for Cain had killed him. And so there you have it. That to me, that's the pasuk of hope. That's the pasuk that says to parents after experiencing this unbelievable tragedy where one son is murdered and another son is banished, so they're left childless. Um, and I love the midrashim, and maybe Jeremy will get you if they're at the top of your memory here to quote. What is it that happens here? There's a breakdown even in the marriage between Adam and Chava, and God increases Adam's desire for his wife, and therefore they cohabit together and make this child. In other words, they find comfort in each other by the design of God. And I want to say that this is the first demonstration of the Bible's major theme, which is to choose life. They both
Yeah.
could easily have said, we're out of here. We're done.
This is a theme that's familiar to us from the Passover story, that when Pharaoh is throwing the babies
Yeah.
in the river, Amram, this is the Midrashic version, Amram, Moses' father, is said to become celibate, and his already born daughter Miriam says, you're worse than Pharaoh, because Pharaoh decrees that the boys should die. You're decreeing that there should be no girls nor boys. And he and Yocheved have another baby who turns out to be, fortunately, Moshe Rabbeinu. Uh, and I don't really have much more midrash than that, but we do know that in the most amazing, better than any midrash, is the enormous birth rates of people in the DP camps after the
Yes,
Holocaust.
that's right.
I actually I actually know somebody um, who was born in a concentration camp. Her parents found, a little time to be together, and at the very, very tail end of the war, she was born in the concentration camp. She is the mother of the Jewish Attorney General of the state of Colorado.
Wow.
And we can think of other people who, in our own communities. I mean, I think of a member of my kahal who lost a baby to SIDS and had a new baby on that child's yard site. It is the astonishing
No, I think about it,
affirmation of
in
life.
terms of the catastrophe that we've experienced as a people over the course of the year, and we don't have statistics. I wish I had this at my fingertips, but people are having children. There are births that are taking place. In the week after the murder of Hirsch Goldberg Poland, there were a number of babies that were named Hirsch in his memory. Um, is there going to be a boomlet because of, we don't know yet, of course, but this is part of the pattern of life that when you are faced with such a catastrophe, I want to say that it's part of the human, but it's part of the Jewish spirit to say we must go on and we will create and we will procreate and we will recreate, and we'll find that impulse, and this is in this story it's a human story because it's Adam and Chava. They're not Jews. They're they're our ancestors. So this is the human story of survival and trying to reclaim something that was lost. And it's a very uniquely Jewish story.
So I just want to draw our attention to what I thought you might have pointed out as accorded to the story at the beginning of chapter 5. So in the English, this is a record of Adam's line. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them. And when they were created, he blessed them and called them man. And in this way, it's joining the creation of chapter 1 with chapter 2. And when Adam had lived 130 years, he begot a son in his likeness after his image, and he named him Seth. And it draws our attention to the fact that when Cain and Abel are born, they're not identified as being in Adam's image.
Yeah.
But Seth is, and this is going to be the line that's going to continue. And even though many of Seth's descendants will die in the flood, Noah is the one that will survive along with his sons, which will repopulate the earth. And I think, part of the lesson is that terrible things can happen, but to borrow a phrasing from William Faulkner in his Nobel Prize for Literature address, that human beings will prevail. And I think that one of the messages that perhaps is sometimes lost in these early chapters of Bereishit is that the message of the Torah is that human beings can prevail, notwithstanding the terrible things that take place.
So
Well,
true.
that's
So,
a
so,
good.
so true. There's a famous midrash, which, without going to too advanced detail, that God says, okay, God says to the angelic retinue, okay, na'aseh adam b'tzelmenu, let's make humanity in our image, and the angels disagree, and the angels that represent truth and peace say, oh my gosh, these human beings are going to be nothing but lies, they're going to be nothing but conflict and fighting, and the angels that represent kindness and justice say, they're going to do a lot of nice things, and they argue back and forth. And then in the Midrash, God says, God kind of boots truth out of heaven, throws truth to the earth, and says, if there's going to be any truth, it's going to have to emerge from the world, not be outside of the world, which is itself an amazing reflection, and creates humanity while the angels are fighting. I think that in the way that Barry just said, you can look at people and you can look at cruelty and you can look at selfishness, and those things are real. They're not false. They are a part of the human character. But I do ultimately think that this religion takes us to a place where we say, life, choose life, affirm life. There's a El Emunah Ve'ein Avel. This is another midrash in a book called the Sifrei. El Emunah, God is a God of faith. Emin be'olamo uvera'o. God had faith in the world and created it. Yeah, God took a chance and created humanity, and it's our job to live up to it.
To be partners,
Right.
complete it, to let it unfold with us. And I think that that's a good place to draw our conclusion as we begin the Torah again, and a Shechianu for all of us, as we first thank all the people that are watching and listening to us, praying for the hostages for their release again, and really looking forward to a year in which we can live inside these stories and and be and share and learn and maybe inspire also, as we've done today. So
that's crazily enough.
that's enough.
Our job is to be in shul, be in school, give people the Torah, and maybe inspire them just a
Maybe a
little.
little bit, a little bit. Wishing everybody a good end to the Yontiv, Chag Sameach, to the extent that it's possible, and a good start to the year of Torah reading. Chag Sameach and Shabbat Shalom. See you next week.
Shabbat Shalom.